And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we have a delicious focaccia bread, and we are going to be using an autolyzed baking method for this, or at least proofing method for this. Now before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that we have an affiliate link with Chef's Temp. I'll put a link in the description below, and use code LOVEYOURFOOD on checkout for 15% off your order of a meat probe or kitchen thermometer. We also have a Patreon if you'd like to support us there, and here's our ingredients. So we have some all-purpose flour. We're going to be using some basil and rosemary, some olive oil, some olives, a little bit of maple syrup, some garlic cloves, some asiago cheese, some instant yeast, some salt, and some water as well. Now we're using instant yeast here, not active dry yeast, and we're going to start by putting the salt and yeast in with the flour and just giving that a mix. Now, until you add the water, the yeast isn't activated, so the salt's not going to hurt it just yet, which is why we're not going to really get started here mixing it until we've added some of the water and some food for the yeast, which is going to be the maple syrup. Now, this is typically a little bit of sugar. We're using maple syrup just to, number one, we have a lot of it, and number two, this is just a little easier than sugar. It's already dissolved, it's already a liquid, and we added a little bit of the water first because we didn't want to make little like dumplings out of the maple syrup in the flour. So we just added a little bit of water first, and then the rest of the water afterwards. So we're just going to continuously scrape down the sides here until this is all completely combined. Now we're not going to be kneading this. We're not going to be, getting it to a dough ball and then letting it knead for ages and ages and ages. We're going to let this sort of sit overnight in the fridge, so it's going to proof at a very low temperature and let the yeast do its thing. This is called an autolyzed dough, and it's a little different from how you do many other kinds of bread dough, but it's quite an easy way to do it because you just mix everything together, and then once it's all well combined like this, you're going to flatten off the top. And then we're going to add a few tablespoons of olive oil on the top. And you want to use a really good olive oil because you're going to be using a lot. And you can taste this in the final product. So you want to use one that's good. We want to make sure that it is all covered. We're trying to keep moisture in partially. And also partially we're just adding, that nice layer of oil on top. Now, this dough, because it has that active instant yeast in there, is going to rise a bunch. It's going to easily double in size, maybe even more, even in the fridge. So what we're going to do is cover it, and then we're going to poke just a tiny hole in one corner as a vent to make sure that as it expands, it's not going to blow the top off. Then we're going to get the next day, after we've let it rise, autolyzed overnight, we're going to butter our pan and then put a little bit of the olive oil in the middle, and you can see how much it's risen. It just fills that bowl now. It rose a bunch overnight. Those nice big bubbles in there. So first thing we're going to do is grease the fingertips just a little bit and punch it down. And we're going to incorporate some of that oil. So you can see that oil sort of partially incorporated and partially sort of ran down the sides. We're going to incorporate as much of the oil as we can, while also making sure we get all of that nice dough off the sides of the bowl. And then once that is done, we are going to get the dough into our baking dish. Now we're using a glass baking dish. That usually means that it's going to take a little bit longer in cooking time. But as you can see here, we're just going to spread it out gently, and then we're going to cover it with another drizzle of olive oil. Now, all of that oil does a few things. Number one, the butter and oil on the bottom will keep it from sticking. It will also help it, have that nice golden crispy bottom as you normally like to see at the bottom of a focaccia. And while it's proofing this second time, and we're going to cover it again and let it proof and rise again, it's going to once again help remove or prevent the loss of moisture, I should say. It's also, again, we're using really nice olive oil, so we want to use that for the flavor. Little vent in there as well. And while that's doing its final proof, we can get all of our sort of inclusions ready. So we've got these beautiful fresh basil leaves from our garden. we're just going to keep most of them on the sprig like that. Some of them we're just going to have as plain leaves. If you find any little tough bits of stem, you can just get rid of those. Same with the rosemary. Again, this is fresh out of our garden, so it's all quite tender, but you don't really want rosemary stems in there, so we're just going to pull all the leaves off of the stems. For the garlic, now we have one little tiny one, and then a bunch of really big cloves of garlic. We're just going to cut those in half. We're not going to do much else to those. We're just going to sort of insert them into the bread as it's baking. It'll get nice and soft and sweet. And same with the olives. We're going to cut the pits out. Now, if you have unpitted, or if you have pitted olives, that makes this much easier. We didn't have any on hand, but we had these beautiful olives with pits still in them, and it just takes a little bit of carving to get those off. And there you go. And we're going to keep those in pretty big pieces, halves or quarters, no smaller than that. And then on top of everything is our asiago cheese. Now you can see once again, it has risen really a lot since we set it to proof. You can see a little jiggle in there. And then we're going to start adding our toppings. We're not going to punch it down just yet. We're going to add our toppings. And then once we're ready to start baking, that's when we're going to sort of punch it down and make sure all of those little inclusions get partially buried in the dough for the baking process. So on go the rosemary and basil. We're going to add our olives, our nice little chunks of olive there, as well as our garlic cloves. And again, for now, we're just going to put them out on top. And then before we bake, again, we're going to be punching this down to release a bunch of the excess air, because it's going to puff up again as it's baking. So we want to give it sort of that space to do that. So there's the last of our garlic. And then once again, you do want to oil your fingers for this because the dough is quite sticky. And just give it a good punch down. You want to get rid of some of that extra air and, incorporate some of those items into the dough itself so that they're not just sitting on top. And then you want to just give it a little scrape along the sides. If you've oiled and buttered your pan properly, it should be pretty easy. And you just want to make sure it's not rising up the sides. So you just want to give it a little scrape. And, a last pass to get rid of any last little bubbles coming up. And then we're going to give it a nice, thorough coating with our asiago cheese, which we've grated earlier. And that's going to give it this beautiful golden toasty cover. And from there, this is ready to go into the oven. So into our preheated oven. And like I said, we're using glass. If you're using a metal tray, it's going to take a little less time than we took. But this was our final result. We have that beautiful golden toasted cheese on top. You can see the bread underneath is done. It's got a golden hue as well. You want to make sure it's not underdone. You can always use a kitchen thermometer to double check the inside temperature. And then you just want to give it a little scrape along the sides to make sure it's going to come loose. If you've oiled the pan appropriately, it should come up pretty easily. Ours came out, honestly, in very easily. You can see that beautiful golden bottom with those big bubbles that came up from the yeast. Really, really standard for focaccia, that nice texture on the bottom. And absolutely delicious. You want to wait until this is cool before you cut into it because you don't want it to collapse. So once it's cool and set, you can cut into this. And we found it absolutely delicious. It was rich with that beautiful olive oil flavor. Those nice inclusions had sort of baked right into it. And that's it. Really, really easy. Not a whole lot of kneading involved in this one, which is nice. That's the beauty of the Autolyse dough process. And we hope you'll give this one a try. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. We'd like to thank our patrons over on Patreon. If you'd like to support us there, I'll put a link for that in the description below as well. And remember to love your food.